Welcome back to the Fly Culture Podcast. I hope you've been fishing, time flies, or as I've been doing, spending some quality time sorting the mess that is my fly boxes. I asked my guest for today back as he has his finger on the pulse of the feel and direction of fly fishing, and I'm always interested to see where we might be heading, be it changes in how we fish, where we fish, or the gear we might be using. I'm pleased to welcome back Steve Cullen to the podcast. Steve, how are you doing, my friend?
Hiya, Pete. First of all, thanks ever so much for inviting me back on. I will make a conscious effort to try and talk articulately, because there's a few people mentioned the last time I was on this 4 or 5 years ago, they had trouble understanding me, so let's see if I've got that sorted, shall we?
Let's see if I can get some subtitles put up and we'll be absolutely fine from there. But I wanted to start by saying a thank you. I know you work with Guide Fly Fishing now, so this is a little bit retrospective. But congratulations on the work you did on the Witchwood Drift XL rod. As ever, I'm late to the party, but I bought one a year ago or so after seeing Andy Buckley's review of it on YouTube. Watch Andy's latest rod review on the Orvis rod as well. It's really, really good. But I've had it a year now and think it's an absolute cracker. Bought it for under £100. Nice work, my friend.
Yeah, that's it's a fascinating rod, that. And when we brought it to the market, there was nothing really like it. And I think that year, I'm right in saying that the rod actually came second to a Sage rod. I think it was the one back then, at the FTEX trade event over in Europe. And it's a weird one because I think it was 3 years or 4 years prior to that, Howard Croston did a rod for Greys. It was a Streamflex and it had a 6-inch section in the bat. So you had to unscrew the bat and add this section. And I thought it was great, but it was faffy. And I was thinking, how on earth can we get on a rod that extends? You can use it for dries, you can use it for nymphing. And I'd like to say it was my idea. However, it was pitched for some bass fishing guy in America. I was in China sourcing product, and I was actually looking at another rod that was getting made in a factory there. But they have a showroom. And I seen this dinky little bass rod, and the boy, I pulled it out, and obviously the first thing you do is you have a wee look at things, and I could see there was a bit of movement in the bat, and I pulled it. Well, it extended about a foot. Whatever was in the handle, it extended. So I says to the guy there, I says, look, is it possible to get this in a fly rod? Anyway, a long story short, and it is a long story, within about 8 months we had it. We had like a working model. So we put the order in that same year. So when I've put my order in, I seen a sample for a friend of mine, Sandro Solderini. He had one on the banks of the Dee when we were fishing the Grayling Festival. And he was like, yeah, this is completely unique. Nobody's got anything like that. And I was like, well, actually, I've got them coming out next year. So, yeah, an exceptional bit of kit. And one of the keys with that was trying to get something that extends through the butt. Because it's a taper, trying to get something without any movement, without any play. And that was the tricky bit. But, yeah, they got it. And what a bit of kit it was. Across the different rod ranges, I think we did 5 or 6 different rod ranges from a Shree weight up to a 5, and they went from a 9'6" to a 10'2". Yeah, just completely different action once you extend it.
Yeah, and it works really well. And like you say, it's easy just to twist it, extend it if you need to. But also, and I've always been looking for these sort of crossover rods that do everything, so that you can cast a line conventionally, and that does it really well, doesn't it?
It does, and to be fair, it does in both its short length and long length, but the whole point of it was to switch over at the time, and it still is, to be fair. Euro Nymphing's taken over everything, but the whole point of those rods is that you could switch from either a dry dropper or indeed a dry fly, like you mentioned, fishing a fly line with a correct profile. It'd give you a delicate presentation. However, that extra 8 inches, it softens the rod right up, so you can actually fish a monofilament leader and nymphs. And that was the key to that. It's one rod in two. It's 2 rods in one, isn't it? That's what I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Nice work, and I like it very, very much. I was using it just the other day. So what have you been up to fishing-wise?
Do you know what? This year, probably more than any other year, I haven't fished that much. And I think there's different factors to that. My little boy's sport daft. So he does football and rugby. I coach rugby. So 3 nights of the week we're out the house. On Saturday and Sunday I'm out. So I need to try and get everything set up at home so that I can get away. Because when I get away, I like to get away for a whole day. I'm still mad for river fishing. That was my latest trip. I was up into Derbyshire. But any river for me, you're talking 2.5 hours to get there. So it needs to be worth my while. I'm one of the lucky few who can remember what the fishing was like 20, 30 years ago. And for whatever reason, and we've all got our own views and opinions on this, but whatever reasons, the fishing isn't as near as good, certainly where I've been fishing, as it used to be. But yeah, my last trip was up in the Y, and I fished with a young guy, and it's worth pointing this guy out because what a little star he was. Jack Westbury, just a nice boy, and one of these guys, I see it a lot with young people in fishing just now. They're determined to be important. If you're good enough, you'll become important. You don't need to, it's like a bragging lights kind of thing. Bigger, longer, faster. If you had a black dog, their black dog would be blacker kind of thing. But Jack was the complete opposite. And what we did do is we basically went fish for fish up the river. We never caught a lot. We never caught a lot at all. So let's not go down the exaggeration route. But we did catch, and we both had fish of 40 centimetres, which is big for that river. Only one each, 40 centimetres. But it was a real pleasure spending some time with somebody that wanted to go fishing. There wasn't, let's stop and take a photo. I took photos, but I took the big camera because obviously with mother work that I do with guide. But yeah, just a lovely guy. That was my last fishing trip, was for grayling, and that's only 2 weeks ago.
And do you find, because I sometimes do these, and winter time particularly, I might head to a chalk stream and I make it a little bit more of a trip. I guess with a younger family it's harder to do, but I might find a B&B somewhere and either drive up the evening beforehand, have a good breakfast, then I'm in good shape to fish hard, fish as long as I possibly can, because the days are shorter as well, aren't they? So you've got to pack as much in as you possibly can and then go from there. Do you ever get that opportunity to be able to do that and not take that drive out of it a little bit?
I get the opportunity. I've got a very understanding wife. Bethan's pretty phenomenal on that front. However, when you get to my age, I sound like I'm an old man here. I'm 53 now. However, I like the comfort of my own bed. I'd rather spend 2.5 hours in the car. As you say, is one of the things with winter is your fishing opportunity is quite small. You're talking 11 o'clock till 2, half 2 if you're lucky. So me getting there late's not a big deal. But I do like the camaraderie of going fishing with people, with the right people, I should say. I've got a couple of friends. We usually fish the Hanack Grayling Festival every year. This is the first year that we've not done it. And we take a little cottage in Llangollen, and we're there for 4 days, making each other breakfast, making each other tea, drinking beer, and just waffling, fishing pish, if you like. Just nonsense, just absolute nonsense. But shooting the breeze, having a nice time, and getting some fishing in between it all. I do get the opportunity occasionally to go away and fish. But like I say, I like the comfort of my own bed, Pete.
But there's that added thing that you've touched on there about the camaraderie, the cooking breakfast for friends, and then fishing happens to be that extra little bit as well, doesn't it? And sometimes, like you said and you alluded to, sometimes we lose that aspect of it and it becomes more so about the fish. And it was interesting, I did a talk at the weekend and I was thinking about this, about the phases that we go through as fly anglers, and this want to catch a fish, want to do that. I don't think I've ever really done it that closely because of some of the stuff that I read that was when we were a little bit younger, came out, made me look at fishing in a completely different way. And so that aspect of it has always been incredibly important to me, that I actually don't give a crap about how many fish I catch or don't catch. It is about how we're chatting now, about shooting the breeze, about whatever it may be. And those moments about cooking breakfast, sitting down, chatting before you get to the river. And the amount of times on grayling days where I've said this, should we go fishing then and get on with it because we're sitting eating breakfast? And there is a bigger part of it, isn't there?
Yeah, like I say, just that day 2 weeks ago, Jack was waiting for me in the car park, and there was another angler there. And we were just spraffing with that angler for a while. This is the first time I've ever met Jack, bear in mind. So it's the first time I've ever met him. And straight away we hit it off, and he was inquisitive. And what really impressed me, and goes back to what you're saying about the actual fishing, we probably spent an hour and a half talking before any of us was like, right, do you want to have a shot? And that was it. It wasn't, and this really gets on my goat. So if you ever come fishing with me, this gets on my goat. So please be aware of it. These guys that have got to rush to the river and get into the good bits first. If you share the fishing, and I did it a lot with Jack, he did it with me, we'd watch each other. Although I think Jack's 27, it was good to watch him and how he fished. And he says the same with me. Most of the time we were fishing, looking at areas, do you want to go? No, you go. No, I'll watch you. No, I'll watch you. I think that side of the fishing's far better than meet up with somebody, hit the river, you go that way, I'll go that way. We'll meet up at 4 o'clock and compare pictures on our phone. That's kind of where we went wrong with fishing. And I'd like to say, for that guy's perspective, he's not one of them. It was nice spending some time with an angler that wanted to talk as much as he did go fishing. And I think that's the thing. I think people get blinkered. That's where I want to go. That's where I'm going. I didn't care about him. He's my mate, but I don't care. I'm going to get in there first. I think we need to lose that attitude. And I don't know where it's come from, because it never used to be like that when I first started fishing. I used to fish with a guy up in Scotland, Shane Kelly. I used to fish the rivers before Shane did, and then we got into still waters. We're talking 89, 90, something like that. We had the still water boom up here in Scotland. England had it before us, obviously, and we kind of met up then. But what happened is we would share cars and share fuel, and then we ended up, within a year, we had so many brown trout waters round about us, we'd be up into the hillocks, and we'd literally blether. Do you want fish? No, I'll wait for something rise. And we'd just sit in the bank, blether. And then you'd cover the waters together as a team. And just now it's more, I'll get in there first, that's a good bit, I'll catch a big one. Let's just focus on the fishing, know what you're going to catch.
You make a really interesting point, and something that where you said, you go, no, you go, that tells me that's the sort of person I want to fish with rather than... And I get some people don't, and, people like yourself particularly, people are probably a little bit nervous about fishing with you for the first time because of what you've done and what you've achieved. So I understand sometimes if people want to say, I'll go down here for a bit so they can get limbered up a bit, feel confident, and then do those sorts of things. But those sorts of things about sitting on a lock and waiting for a fish to rise. And this is what I'm circling round to, because you're saying you're doing this in the late 80s, early 90s, and you were doing it then. So it's not this cycle that we talk about. It's how you view fishing, and possibly to a degree how we view life as well, isn't it?
Yeah, you've maybe hit something there. And it's maybe about the person. There's certain individuals that you go fishing with. I'm trying to think how to phrase this diplomatically. Some people are desperate. Some people are not so desperate. There's a really well-known angler. I wouldn't say who he is. However, he kind of courts controversy wherever he goes. And he gets says, well, if you're that good, enter a competition and let's see how good you are. And this person doesn't. And the reason, you only grow as a fisher, you only grow in anything if you're willing to fail. The only way you can grow and learn is if you're willing to fail. Some people, whether it's through social media or friends in high places or, I don't know, their peers, they're not willing to take that chance for fear of failure. It doesn't bother me if I go fishing and didn't catch. It really doesn't bother me. Don't get me wrong, I want to catch every time I go. However, it's never going to be the case. But I think a lot of anglers, unfortunately, are feared of failure. Don't be feared of failure, because you'll learn something. You're always learning with fly fishing, any kind of fishing. And I think that's a philosophy I've kind of took through life. I've had some hard knocks these last few years, especially since COVID happened. You know what happened to me with my job. I had a very successful career, and then COVID came along. I've basically started again. And you'll get people sniping and saying, oh, well, he did this and he did that. Yes, I did it, but look in the position that I'm in now. I've got through that because I'm not scared of failure. And I think a lot of people need to look at themselves and say, I'm afraid of failure.
Good for you, mate, and pleased it's going really, really well as well. And it's interesting that we're probably circling round the edge of the rabbit hole, but you're saying about the fear of failure. Do you think part of this is a function of social media, so that every day is portrayed as perfect, every fish is perfect, every cast is perfect, and so that's where part of this is possibly coming from?
Yeah, I think so. I think in the olden days we had the angling press. And I think what happened with angling press is we got a monthly snippet of what was happening. Sometimes it'd be more than a monthly snippet. But usually we would say, so we had stillwater trout angler, fly fishing and fly tying, trout and salmon, trout angler. There was another one that eludes me. There was a Scottish one as well. Yeah. But these were monthly publications that came out. They gave you a glimpse into the world of fly fishing. And that glimpse would get you G'd up for your next trip. Here's a new fly. This is a new venue. Look at the size of this fish. What's a tiger trout? Never seen a tiger trout. Where can I catch that? All these things made you want to go fishing. It was a monthly snippet that sort of fed the hunger for your hobby. If you go into Facebook, if you go into Instagram, I prefer Instagram because it's image driven. But if you go into any of these sort of social media haunts, you've literally nailed it. The fish are huge. The hatch was brilliant. Everybody's taking flies from a pool. They're sipping size 20 olives. They're fishing 0.08 tippet. Blah, blah, bloody blah. Come on. We all know, and this is what's frustrating, most of the guys that are at a certain level within the fly fishing industry, any kind of fishing, you know what's going on. And I know for a fact, and this is the upsetting bit, this is what's annoying, these pool tail sippers, 9 times out of 10, they've came out in 10-pound nylon in a streamer. I know this. And I'm sure people that listen to this podcast know this. That's the unfortunate bit. If I catch a big fish, I'll tell you what I've caught it on. I'm going to waffle nonsense about tiny flies, skinny tippet. And to be fair, there's no many instances where you need tiny flies and skinny tippet. Let's be really honest. We're talking skinny water, August and September. And to be fair, if you had any common sense, you wouldn't go fishing then. The last couple of years, the fishing's been poor that time of year. But yeah, I think you're right, Pete. I think this is I rolled over the perfect cast. My fly alighted on the water like thistledown. A head popped up, blah, blah, blah. I get 14 paragraphs of somebody taking a trout on a dry fly. I like it. I like the fact people write about their day. That's a great thing. But the inherent waffle that's involved, I think we can all see it for what it is.
Yeah, it's a very dangerous and difficult one. And you said the streamer thing as well. And there's that inherent pressure. And I think it was the last podcast or the podcast before that, I said to people, think about going fishing without your phone and not worrying, and see if you still have that good time, to take that pressure off yourself. It doesn't matter. You've had a good time. You might be with your buddy and you've had a good time, and it doesn't matter, does it? As long as you've gone out there and done it, you don't have to always tell the world about these sorts of things.
I mean, listen, I'm guilty of taking a phone. However, the last time I went up the river, I took the big camera. Jack's phone stayed in his pocket, my phone stayed in my pocket. We never took the phones out of our pocket the whole day long, and I think that says a lot. There is occasions where I've seen it myself. I've seen people run into the river to get low to take a picture of their mate playing a fish for their socials. I prefer to take the big camera out, take my time and get a nice shot. And I think there's a few young guys that are doing that just now, and they're making a really good job of it. A lot of the images that we see it's an image for the sake of an image. There's a few guys, and obviously you didn't want to point fingers. The last thing I want to do is point fingers, but people know who they are. It's consistent tackle, fish, naming brands. I don't think there's a need for it. I personally don't think there's a need for it.
Yeah. I've often said on here that I'm not going to buy a rod because you put it next to a fish. And I've used an example of Andy's review of your rod that made me buy the rod, and it worked really, really well. And this is probably a difficult question for yourself, somebody who works with a tackle company, but do you think companies to a degree are a little bit to blame for that?
So the company that I work for, and you know the guys,
yes,
their ethics are on a different level. They are completely different. Well, are they completely different? I don't know, but they've got very high moral standards. Such high moral standards that one of their pro team instigated a little bit of trouble. Quick as a flash, he was gone. And that's a big thing for me. I think Guide have got the right approach. You very rarely see, especially from the brand itself, any negative press, any people that you wouldn't want to go fishing with, any too much of this or too much of that. I think Guide's really focused on what they do, and they're all about fishing and the fish welfare as well, and I think that's a really big thing. Other companies, I don't think so. I think the fishing companies in general are pretty good. I personally think the fishing companies in general are pretty good. I think they've got quite a tight rein on their ambassadors or pro guides. And I think if you do overstep the line, I would like to think it'd be reined in. Some of the fly tying companies, however, it's constant. It's constant focus. It's constant attention. For me, and you've got this with the magazine, and we've talked about this before, there's content for the sake of content, or there's stuff that sticks out. Go for the stuff that sticks out every single time. And I think that's what Guide's really good at. If you have a look at their website, if you have a look at their blogs, if you have a look at their posts, when they post, it's succinct, it's current, it's to the point, and it looks great. And I think other brands, especially fly companies, could learn a lot for that. Yes, it's a fly. Yes, it's a particular material. Do I need to name the company every single time I put a post in? Probably not. Do I need to say that I would never have caught this fish if I hadn't used this material? Probably not, because that's nonsense as well. We're too long in the tooth. There's nothing new in fly fishing. I was looking at it before we come in this podcast, and I was thinking, what's new? What realistically is new? We had nanotechnology with fluorocarbon nearly 2 decades ago now. What's new? That's the thing.
They're really salient points, and like you say, that we're trying our utmost. And I understand from a retailing point of view that you've got to try and offer new product to people, but I think we're seeing these gaps between new products getting a little bit wider, and I don't think that's going to harm things in any major way. And the other thing, coming back, kudos to Guide for dumping the person who was not behaving in a gentlemanly manner. I think we know about that one, and it's worth mentioning, isn't it, that the fly fishing world is not paved with gold. I think on a comment when this was called out, I said that you're not going to get rich from being a pro. You're probably not even going to get free kit, because usually you have to send it back. Or, I always tried to buy it as well. That was a much better way to do it. It's not what it's perceived, is it?
No, in some of the companies, the way we work is it's either a discount or a product's loaned. That product's never yours. And I think that's a really good ethos. I think giving stuff for free, the person who's getting it is beholden on that company forever after. That's kind of how it works. And I've seen it a lot, and you'll have seen it as well. There'll be a certain relationship between this person and this company, and the relationship goes sour, and there's all this nastiness, and everybody gets to hear about it, all the nastiness. It's very rare. It's very rare if you're a nice person, you'll be with that company forever. That's the way I see it. It was different for me. I was employed by Leader and in turn Witchwood. However, I work for Guide now. That's the difference. And I think if your ethics are right and you're the right person, you're going to be with that company forever. That's what I think. Unless at such time that company says, do you know what, we didn't need this person or we didn't have that money. I think if you're the right person, you're doing the right job when you're asked to do it, I think you'll be with that company forever. And you're right with what you say. There's no money. You're no got to be millionaires. And it cracks me up when I see these young guys and it's like, I'm a member of this and I'm a member of that. Realistically, you're getting a couple of spools of tinsel and some fritch that's literally cost £5. The expectation on you is to hashtag this, hashtag that, and promote the business on every post. Are you selling your soul to the devil? I don't know, but it's a heavy price to pay for something that's not a lot. The actual material gifts that you get is not a big deal. And a guy that I know quite well, I actually brought him into the Witchwood team. I put a Witchwood team together when I worked with Witchwood. And he was one of my ambassadors. Not that long ago, he packed a whole lot in. I think the problem is you need to treat people with respect. I think you need the right people in the first place. But as a company, you need to look after your staff. Once you don't look after your staff, I think that's when things go a little bit pear-shaped. And I think that's when the nastiness comes in. It's having that relationship. It's a two-way relationship. It's like any relationship. It's like working with somebody in your normal workplace. You need to have a working relationship for it to succeed.
Yeah, that's some good points. And circling round again about this sort of pressure for content, and I'm a dinosaur about this stuff, but the Instagram on my laptop wasn't working, so it was doing suggested posts, which I found out this morning. Emma showed me how to get rid of it. But so these spheres were not fishing, but it was roughly around that or the outdoors. And the lengths that people were going to create content that was just unbelievable, jumping off stuff, flying off stuff, throwing themselves in front of it. You know, the hurricanes in Florida, we had people chasing those just so they can get a few likes. Yeah. And whether that is, I don't think it's in our world to that degree. And I'm hoping that we're starting, you know, with the news that we've talked about recently, that we start shifting away from that. And it's lovely that people want to share their days fishing. I'm really happy about that. But it's when you're trying to turn it into something, then you sort of lose what that's about, don't you?
I think you're being very diplomatic there, Peter, so I'll just say it for you. There's been a lot of instances recently where people have taken an opportunity. Let's just say it's an opportunity. They've took it to the nth degree, and that's really sad. The fact that you're using a living creature in so many different ways, looks, basically taking a fish and trying to get the most out of that fish. Every opportunity that you can get, so that you've got images for a later date, I find quite sad. If you catch a fish on a given day, post a picture of the fish, not a problem. However, didn't say you've caught this fish here and then another fish the next again day fish there when all you've done is cross the river and took a picture of the same fish. It's unfortunate, and I'm sure it happens everywhere. Whatever your field is, people unfortunately tend to waffle. It's about being the bigger man. Look at me, I've done this. The problem with fishing is it's a creature. That's the difference. In any other sport, it's inanimate objects. Unfortunately, with us, it's not. And I think that's the bit that let everybody down. And it's not just one person, let's be honest. It's several people that'll do it. And a lot of the people we might not know, but the ones we do know, you expect better. let's expect better. As a fishing community, let's expect better. Let's have a higher standard, because one of my friends is a guide, a fishing guide. He also does competitions, and one of the things with competitions is you kill fish. So you've caught your fish, you kill it. That's it. That's your competition. Then you weigh them. But that's it done. The fish is put out its misery. That's it done. And he says to me, he says, how can we justify hooking a fish, holding a fish up for the camera? He says, I get all that. The wet hands, that's fine. He says, but how can we justify guys up a banking, holding a fish really quite badly, and then getting a picture of them returning it to the water when they're gripping it? We never knew about that when I was small. When I was young, we literally catch a fish and kill it. It was for eating. That's why I went fishing. And then I got to the stage where I wanted to catch a fish to see what it looked like. That sounds terrible, but the fishermen will get what I'm saying. And then return it. I've got a good level now, I maybe never used to have in the past, but I've got a good level now of how to treat a fish. The way to hold a fish, the way to release a fish, the way to unhook a fish. And that kind of education seems to be missing or ignored by some people in the fishing fraternity. Not all of them. I would say the majority of people are exceptional. A lot of great anglers, a lot of great young anglers making a name for themselves, treating fish with the utmost respect. However, there's always the few, and it's always the minority, that sort of upset the apple cart for everybody else. And that's what's happened in this case. Fishing as a community is a really good community. Most people get on, everybody do their thing. If you want to share a picture, that's fine. However, don't rock the boat by doing silly things, because you'll always get found out. There's always somebody there that knows a little bit better. Everything comes out in the end, Pete. When you get to 53, you realise that.
Yeah, they're not props, are they? And I know for myself, I was grayling fishing at the weekend. I didn't even put a picture of the fish up. I just put a couple of rods, the river. And even with the trout, I hold it in my hand. If it goes, it goes. If not, I can get the fish. It's the gill plate, and around there, I love to photograph those little blue spots if we get them.
Yeah, blue spot,
Yeah, and everyone is beautiful. Everyone is stunning, or the eye of a grayling. They're absolutely stunning. And if it goes, it goes. It doesn't matter if I don't get it. And I'm trying really hard not to be preachy about it, because it's up to people. And we're lucky, although yourself, I guess you're not fishing so much at the moment, I get to fish a little bit. So it doesn't matter. My day doesn't hit. And I get that people who get a day off and want to go fish and take a photo of their fish, I get that. And I think we've seen a change, haven't we? Like you said, the majority in our community are not using fish as a prop, which is wonderful, isn't it? There's definitely been a change from our day that, it was that big grip and grin, push towards the camera. It's changed dramatically. And the ability with camera phones to take a shot underwater and those sorts of things are really cool, aren't they?
And also the fact that you can do all these filters, the images are really, really good. I think in the past, when I sort of edited the fishing magazine, the same for most fishing magazines, the hero shot is grip and grin. A lot of the pictures that you see now on social media will be a hand cradling the fish in the water with the water going over its gills. In some cases, people lift it up, but if you know what you're doing, you can have that fish up, get a photo in a second and a half, if everything's set up right. Even with a proper DSLR camera, you can do that, but with a phone, it's even quicker, it's more instant. But I think you are seeing, in some of the young guys taking photographs, the images are of the fish in the water or just hovering over the water. I did it with Jack. We got a picture, and I've basically got the head of the grayling going into the river and the bottom half of its body in the river. Shots like that, to me, now are more appealing than a grip and grin. What did I see the other day? One of my friends, and he's a very good angler, he's up in Scotland, and he had a colossal grayling. But the way it was held, I was like, oh God, didn't do that. Please, didn't do that. But that's another example of maybe a little bit more education is needed. I think grayling especially, one of the problems with grayling, probably more than any other fish, when you catch them, you tend to be fishing in freezing conditions. So it's getting your hands in the water in the first place. Yeah, that's a big thing. But grayling especially, just a nice picture. As you say, the gill plate, for me it's the dorsal. It's the colour on the tip of the dorsal of the male that does it for me. I really like that. But yeah, there's a lot to be said for taking an arty shot of a trout, or a gray, or any fish for that matter, rather than the holding it up as if it's, what's that, Lion King? Is it Toomba? I forget. But I see a lot of that, and I see a lot of it on Instagram with Americans. It's like holding a salmon up, yeehaw! And you're like, come on.
Yeah, like your style. Now, I'm going to circle back for a moment because you talked about tiger trout and you talked about those old magazines from years gone by.
Yeah.
And I remember that article in Stillwater Trout Angler, and it was about catch tigers in wherever it was, or beware of tigers. And I remember it like it were yesterday. And I remember that Stillwater Trout Angler with Nick on the cover. And funnily enough, I messaged him this morning just to say, hey, do you fancy coming over for lunch on Saturday? And I remember that young man on the cover there of those magazines were absolutely fantastic, weren't they?
They were brilliant. And things like that, it was like, inspirational is maybe too big a word. That's maybe a bit too big. But it certainly gave you the impetus to say, right, where can I go to catch this? I can remember when golden trout first came to Scotland, and it was just like, whoa, look at that! And because you could see them a miles away, and they were the hardest fish in the lake to catch because everybody could see them. But a lot of people didn't stock ghosties anymore because if you're a clued up fisherman, you know if that ghostie's swimming about, there's 10 other rainbows underneath them. So a lot of people didn't stock those now. But I can remember, what is the name of the place? It's not Avington. There's another stocking water down south, and I forget the name. It'll probably come when Meon Springs. There you go. Meon Springs. They had a sandy trout, golden trout, blue trout, tiger trout, and brook trout. How many trout do you need? But I think that was the still water scene back then. There was big fish, there was different fish. It was full on. We've now kind of came full circle where the trout tend to be a specific size. The emphasis now, probably more than any other time in fishing industry, and this is probably due with social media or magazines, I don't know, but a lot of us take a more natural approach now. I think we get more enjoyment from a natural approach. Didn't get me wrong. I'm in a little syndicate here in Warwickshire. It gets stocked 3 times a year, December, January and February. Sometimes they'll do November, December, January. So that's the only time it gets stocked. I can go there in June and have the place to myself, fishing tiny dries and buzzers. When it's stocked, people get stocky fever. And I still see that in the small still waters now. But I think more now than any other time in the past, people are taking a natural approach rather than pulling lures. Bung's a big thing. Christ, bung's a big thing. But then a lot of people kind of fish the way they want to fish because they're a little bit older. So you kind of decry something because you don't like it. What else have I noticed a lot in fishing? I'll tell you what I've noticed a lot, Pete. And you probably don't see it as much on the rivers, but certainly from a still water scene, anglers have become very lazy. And I think this is because we've got triploid fish. In the past, sex fish were aggressive, so you could pull lures fast. We've now become, this is the setup of the average reservoir angler nowadays. A bit of stuff and a fab. A bit of stuff and a booby. Cast it out and do nothing. That's your job. All day long, sit back, cast it out, the rod will get pulled out your hand. It's very rarely to see boys working for fish. Have we become lazy? Have we become complacent? I think so. I think there was a lot to be gleaned from the guys that did it a long time ago because they've got all the tricks up their sleeves. They know different stuff. They know different methods. But triploids, Has triploids made such a big deal? I think so, yeah. Yeah, triploids.
That's a really nice point. Really like that a lot. What else are you catching? What else are you enjoying fishing for?
Mullet. I get to Devon once a year. We usually go down in August. And it's funny, you told me to go to this place. I won't say where it is, but you told me to go to this place 5-6 years ago for bass. However, that place runs into quite a long estuary and it becomes canal-like before, on a very high tide, it'll actually flood up into a river. I've worked out the times to fish that now to catch mullet. and I've done all right, actually. So this year, I landed 2 and hooked 4, and that's maybe 5 trips. So that's some going. And the year before, I landed 2 as well. But I'm fishing completely different for everybody else, I think, anyway. I know a lot of the London boys, they'll fish dirty water with spectral worms, Arp's bloodworms under a bung. And I think what's happening is the fish are just soaking all along the bottom, and that's an accident. The way I'm fishing flies on the surface. And I know Cullen fishes pulling quite fast. He's got this short jerky retrieve where, somebody shrimp, it'll come to me. But he's got this shrimp pattern. Yep, rubby shrimp, sand shrimp. And I fish them as well. But the fly has done really well for me, and I told a guy called Daz Jackson, who's probably the best saltwater angler in the UK, by the way, up there in Wales. And I basically says to him, you might have to beep this out. I'll beep it out myself. I says, you'll not believe what I was catching them on. And I sent him a picture, and he basically wrote back, for fuck's sake. So yeah, I was using a trout fly to catch them. Yeah. But this trout fly looks exactly like a sand shrimp. But yeah, mullet have been a big thing. I've been taking my little boy to the canals, and I've been using a bloodworm on the dropper and a little jig streamer, Martin's Minnow, on the point, and I've been using my nymphing rod. And there's nothing big in the canals because they've all been predated out, basically, or fished out. However, I've had zander up to £2 and I've had pike up to £3. Lots of perch up to about £1. But it gives me time on my wee boy. He can't fly fish yet. I've tried, but as a parent, it destroys me that my boy can't fly fish. And I've tried to help, and she's like, get off, Dad, get off! So he drop shots and nymph.
Nice. That sounds perfect to me. I remember those mullet things because, again, my technical lack of skill. You said, I was trying to explain the place you're talking about, and you said, drop me a pin. And that was like talking Chinese to me.
Yeah.
And I managed to get it in the end. And we will do that next year when you're down because I know I've been away and then... Because I want to get
it's timing for us.
Here. Yeah, I want to get you on the river. I know I've been trying to get you on the river as well too. But we'll sort that out at some stage. So what do you think is looking good in fishing, and what do you think the state of fishing is? And it's interesting at the beginning you said, it was the hatches aren't as good. And I'm thinking about that when we probably spoke to old timers as well, speaking as old timers ourselves now, but when we spoke to the old timers, they probably said it's not as good.
That's right. That's right.
Do you think we just have to roll with what we actually have? But how does the scene as a whole look to you as well?
I'll cover off hatches first, if I may, Pete. So this year, I tend to have the first week of the year on the Tweed. I'm looking for big fish. So I'll have a week on the Tweed. It's a lot of time, it's a lot of money, it's a lot of commitment. So this year, for 5 days on the Tweed, I fished for 3 hours. And the reason for that is, and I'm sure a lot of people will find this similar wherever they live, the last couple of years, we've been getting rain starting in October and November, and we're still getting it in April. So you're talking big rivers the whole time. And that's what happened to me this year on the Tweed. Last year it was okay. I had a few more fish last year, but this year I had 3 hours dry. And all I'll do is fish dries. I'm looking for a big fish, so I'll fish dries. The hatches were there. So the early season hatches that I used to see on the Tweed in the year 2000, they're there. They're still there. But for whatever reason, and my reasoning behind it, I'll come to this because I think it's happening in a lot of rivers, but for whatever reason the trout are not coming up for them. A similar scenario, I took 2 days down in, what's it called? The River Taff. So I did the Usk and the Taff across 2 days. I never seen a single fish rise. So the whole 2 days I've not seen a single fish rise. So I've had to resort to nymphing. Now, both those rivers are guaranteed risers. Always. There's always guaranteed risers. This year I've never seen them. I don't think it's the case with the Taff, but it's certainly the case with the Tweed. A lot of the English rivers, the Dove being one of them, the lower Dove, the middle Dove, and I would say the Clyde's another big one, is the infestation of signal crayfish. I believe we're beginning to see it in our reservoirs now as well, unfortunately. These big fish that would come up at the start of the season. It's always the time to catch a big fish, is March and April. Wherever you live, it's March and April. That's when you get the big ones. However, they will come again later on in June in the evenings. Is it medium olives at that time of year? I believe it is. But now, their focus seems to be looking down. And I think that's starting to happen on the reservoirs. Whether we like it or not, the signal crayfish are getting in there in numbers. So the hatches are still there. Are they as prevalent? Certainly not through the middle parts of the year. I think March and September, yes, large dark olives are pretty much guaranteed wherever you go. But the rest of the sort of olive family or uprights family, if you like, not as much. Granum, probably not as much unless you go to the Usk or Taff. But you used to get fish coming up for needle flies and things as well. You get huge falls of spinners, which would be phenomenal fishing. Where's that went? The spinner fishing on the Tweed was just second to none. And I'm sure that's the same for some of the rivers down south. The spinner fishing was phenomenal. But that seems to have disappeared. And what sort of brought it home to me was, you got somebody as gifted as Paul Proctor, and he's mooching about with this thing called all-purpose terrestrial, which suggests to me that the fly hatches under there, however, the fish are opportunistic. Has that always been the case? Probably, but I think the fly hatches were such that you could go out with a specific olive pattern, obviously change the size and the hook size, whatever, and catch fish. But the fact that we're fishing a lot with beetles and all-purpose terrestrials and another one's the elk here and CDC, they're prospecting flies. They're opportunistic flies. In my opinion, they're opportunistic flies. And I think if that's the way we're going, fine. I didn't mind that. At least fish are still rising. I see it a lot. I fish a lot up in the Derbyshire Derwent. It gets no hassle because other anglers are usually fishing Derbyshire Y. But I can go up there and I can work my way under the trees. You're never going to catch a big fish in there. 2 pounds a big fish. But you're consistently getting pound, maybe £1.50. But again, it's prospecting stuff. They're usually taking aphids coming off the trees or stuff blowing onto the water. I think the other bit worth mentioning is mayfly. That was non-existent this year on most rivers. Again, because we get such bad flooding from October through to April. It clears all the silt out. It clears all the fish out. It clears all the mayfly out. And it's a real shame because the particular river I fish, the fish that are in there are colossal. They're very hard to get to because it's a coarse fishing river. Most of it's canal-like. Some of the pools are 3 acres wide. They're huge, Pete. But I've seen fish in there, I'm convinced they're double figures. Absolutely colossal. But last year I never seen them, and this year I never seen them. And I think the problem with trout is there needs to be enough on the surface for them to come up. Otherwise they're not bringing their heads up. But it'd be interesting to see what other people think of that. Maybe it's a theme, fly hatches. I personally don't think it's as good as it was from June to August, but certainly March and September, I think the hatches are still there.
There's some really interesting points, and particularly the one about the signal crays. And I was recently in Spain, actually, and they were trying to bite me in the river there. But yeah, you're talking about those big trout rivers. Like you say, there's no reason for them to look up if they can eat a signal crayfish, which is the equivalent of so many flies anyway. And I wondered that wet winter had a lot to do with it, and the word catch up. It felt as though the season we were continually trying to catch up, and we were behind the whole way and never really got there. And I'd marked my season 4 out of 10 to somebody yesterday. What do you give your one?
I'd say less than that on the dry fly river front. It's probably been the worst year ever for me, dry fly river wise. I never got out as much as I would like to. However, I did get to the right places with the big fish, and I've never seen them, unfortunately. And that's the same for everybody. And do you know, social media is your marker, it's your litmus test, if you like. Last year there were so many big trout, especially for the Welsh boys that went on social media. There's a lot of big Scottish trout that went on as well. A lot of big trout in general. Where were they this year? They weren't there. Was that maybe a knock-on for the wet weather? I don't know. But they certainly weren't there like they were last year. That's my own personal opinion. I don't think they were there in the numbers that they were. Are they still there? Maybe. But if you've got a signal crayfish, I think these things molt 3 or 4 times a year. I'm not scientific about it, but when they molt, they're like jelly, Pete, and they just inhale them. And it's so much protein. These trout didn't need to eat for ages after that.
Do you remember, again, let's come back to Stillwater trout angler. Do you remember the article in there? There was a lake in Wales that had signals in it, and there was somebody devising some crayfish patterns for the lake because they'd realised that the trout were actually eating them. Do you remember that one, going back?
I do remember that, and I actually seen something recently.
Yeah.
No, but there was also something recently. It wasn't in the Anglian press, but it was on social media where people were tying up signal crays for a specific lake in Wales, and I forget which one it was, but I don't think it's just... I think these things are proliferating all over the place, especially in our canal systems, and I think once they're in canal systems, that's it, because the canal systems are runoff and draw-offs that end up going into still waters and rivers. I think that's the only way they can migrate. I don't think that they're like coarse fish that can go into like water birds that get transferred here, there and everywhere. I think they have to go through a waterway, but they seem to be everywhere. I've been on a little river. You've probably seen a picture. If anybody follows me on Facebook, I had probably it was the biggest brown trout I've ever caught in my life in the UK from a river, and it was colossal. Its head must have been 1.5 pounds, it was that big. But that river, you can't even call it a river. It's like a tiny little, forgive the language here, shithole brook. It's horrible. It's got like electric bikes in it. It's got tyres. It's a horrific place, scary. And to get there, you're having to walk through a park where you're feared to getting stabbed, so you need to take a Rottweiler away just to get there. So anyway, when you're there, somebody's put in one section of the river, there's what do we call it? It's like a long, thin keep net. And in this long, thin keep net, you could see 6 or 7 signal crays. Now, this is in a tiny river that you can jump across and maybe a foot deep, and there's this keep net, and you can see these 6 or 7 crayfish. But yeah, I see it all the time. There's a river of fish over in Leicestershire as well, and it holds some really big fish. But unfortunately, the last couple of years, and the amount of crayfish I see on the bottom, and these things stick out a mile. If you're anywhere near clear water, the American signal crays, although they've got the red signals on their claws, you didn't see that because the claws are facing down. They only bring them up if they're threatened. However, they tend to have these white spots that look like eyes on the bottom of their tail, and you see these white dots going about the river. But it's the amount that's worrying. What do these things eat? These things eat everything, literally. And you'll actually, and I don't think I'm the only one that's seen this, you'll see trout that have got scars on their tails where they've been pinched. Trout, like a lot of fish, become pretty dormant at times, and they'll literally lie there pretty much resting on the bottom, and a signal will go for them. Just strange creatures. But they shouldn't be here, Pete. That's it in a nutshell. They should not be here.
Absolutely. And we're talking about the environment a little bit, and it's interesting to touch on the Clean Water March, which was a wonderful case of various water users coming together. Do you think this could be the start of something, or do you think the government will try and ride it out and just say, well, we'll carry on as before? Or do you think this is the beginning of a bigger movement?
You and I have known about the pollution in the rivers and the waterways for a very, very, very long time. I can remember pre-Angling Trust, was it Trout and Salmon Association? I believe it was. It was an association before the Angling Trust, and they were trying to stamp it out. Now all our water authorities are privately owned, usually by people hundreds and thousands of miles away in some cases. They didn't care. My personal opinion is, it'd be nice. It would be really nice if whatever action we take had a knock-on effect for the better. I think the amount of money that they're making and the amount of money that they would have to reinvest in the infrastructure, from a business perspective, they look at it and like, we'll take the fines. And that's the real issue. The government needs to stand up and say, do you know what? We're not fining these guys enough. Nothing's prohibitive. And I think that's the problem. If you're going to put your foot down, you need to make it so that any company stands up and takes notice. You see it a lot. A good example is the rich boys in London. They'll park wherever because they can pay their parking ticket. The risk isn't as bad as the reward. They're quite happy to take that risk. And I think that's the same with these big industries. it'd be great if they did something, because the state of some of the rivers is shocking. If you, and you'll know this yourself, given where you live, I've seen it quite extensively in Devon actually, but I see it up here as well. When we get a big flood, we get a thing called a storm drain overflow. And you see it on the lower lying branches, toilet paper, sanitary towels, all the discharge that comes through these storm drain overflows. You see it on the low lying branches on a river. It's shocking. A summer river, the bottom of a summer river. I used to swim in the river. I used to swim in the Teviot every year in the summer. And God knows what was getting pumped into it then, but I think it's 10 times worse now. And I think the biggest thing for us is population explosion.
Yeah, you're dead right. I think probably urban rivers are getting a little bit cleaner than they have
Definitely
been going back, whereas the ones, and just this morning I walked the dog and I filmed a bit of this little stream that I don't fish, but I walked by and it was coloured up, and I was saying, well, look, we've got runoff from the road, we've got runoff from where cattle have been in the river, we've got the maize crops. Then I panned round and said, look, this is the sewage treatment works for my village, I'm all over this. So whenever, and I phone them up, if I see a lorry there and I say, what were you doing with that lorry today?
That's right.
And I'm on to them, and they've been as good as they can be about this, but I'm on them the whole time. And I think even on a micro level, it's worth doing, but it's, I like you, I'm a little bit concerned that this will just continue. And even when this march, I think there was 15,000 people on the march, and I was very proud to be part of that.
Yeah.
But it didn't get the coverage that the Farmers' March got yesterday or the day before.
The Farmers got a lot. I actually seen the Farmers stuff on YouTube, and I think and I know we've got it with Fergal, and we've got other people doing great jobs. That boy's down in the test. We've got some great people doing great things. However, none of them is Jeremy Clarkson. And I think if you've got somebody of that profile, there's a lot of people getting involved now actually saying that. And I think the fact that you've got, Bob Mortimer and
Paul White,
terrible. Yeah, they've added their tuppence worth as well. I think the more strings you've got to your bow, the better. But I think that's the difference with the Farmers thing. They've got Jeremy Clarkson, and whether you like the guy or no, as a spokesperson, he's up there. People notice. And you're right with what you say. Is that's a big march right through the centre of the city, and nothing was really on the mainstream news. Not really. The London news there was, because I get the London news where I am. However, it was a big deal, and I think, I don't know, it's a difficult one. As fishermen, we're all really concerned about it. But does it affect the reservoir anglers? Does it affect the stillwater anglers? I think we need to be one cohesive unit if we're going to do anything. And I think the Angling Trust, and we'll not get into it, however, the Angling Trust need to do something to bring everybody together. At the end of the day, they're the governing body. They're the people that should be represented, and they need to bring people from the angling community together.
Yeah, it's always felt like, as anglers, we've been behind the curve, and you've had the surfers with the sewage, you've had the free swimmers, you've had the kayakers. And, I've seen on our local news, and they are really good about local issues with pollution and stuff like that. But I see, there was a demo at a water company in Plymouth. So I didn't know anything about it. And I'd have been there if I knew these sorts of things. And it's a real shame that... like you say, if we've had this to draw us all together, and if we can be part of a bigger movement, then perhaps we might be able to affect some form of change, I hope.
Definitely.
Yeah. So let's move on, because we're coming up an hour now. What have you got planned for 2025? You talk about these trips, early season trips, chasing, I guess, the hatches on these rivers. But do you is it now that you're starting to think about those things, or is it a wet, snowy, miserable January that you start putting dates in the diary and saying, right, okay, this is what I'm going to do?
I've got dates in the diary just now. I'm looking at Bosnia. I like fishing abroad. I like what we talked about before, getting away with your friends, like a shared community, just a few boys away fishing, drinking, eating, waffling, but fishing, getting some fishing in. I've never been to Bosnia. I fancy it because it's right up my street. It's technical. But again, I've got a family, so I can't go away for a long time. So I'll be there for 4 days. I'm in Cornwall in April, so I'll have a wee look down there. I will be on the Tweed. I'm always on the Tweed. I might only get up for a couple of days, but it takes me 6.5 hours to get up. Obviously, my family's there, so I'll get 2 days and then drive back down. Your hatch window at that time of year, if you're lucky, is an hour. It's literally an hour, but it really can be worth it. There's some colossal fish in there. What else will I be doing next year? Probably the same as what I did this year. I'm ever hopeful, and this is what I mean about fishing now. I used to be able to go out and Draycott. We'll just use Draycott as an example because it was next to me. So when Keith Causer had Draycott, and to be fair, the first year I had it, I could go out there on an electric motor on a June evening and July evening and target big fish. Electric motors, nice and quiet. I could sneak up them, get a dry on them and catch them. And that's always been the same for Rutland and Grapham and Pittsford with fry feeders. I've always been one for big trout and targeting big trout. They've disappeared. I went fishing so this year I've been out for brownies about 4 or 5 times on Pittsford. The brownies are like £2. I moved a big fish. I had somebody out, I had a German guy out, I was guiding on there, and one of my friends that took him out the day before to catch rainbows, he says, "Look, Steve, I really want to catch a brown trout." We caught one about £3, but he brought one up that was about 11 or 12. It was colossal, right to the boat. That's the only big brownie I've seen on there this year, and I've been on it 6 or 7 times. You should be seeing these things regularly. Now, is that again because there's signal crayfish in there? Is it because, and I'm talking about Pittsford specifically here with brown trout, is it because you can fish lures from May until October, and then from October you can deadbait, and you can deadbait from the bank? If you're a big brownie, you can have half a mackerel or a buzzer. What do you got to have? I think you've got to have half a mackerel. But yeah, getting the big fish has always appealed to me, Pete. Always, always. Whether that be trout in a river, grayling in the river, or trout in the reservoirs. So I think my focus next year will be back on the rivers again. Definitely.
Nice. Well, the fish better watch out. I'm absolutely dreading this one because it's time for that song. And I know it's going to be some techno song that I'm going to know nothing about. I'm not going to understand the words. Or what are you going to give me for the fly culture? I know you did on a post somewhere or other, and I thought, oh God, that's going to give me a headache if I listen to that. But what are you going to give? We are a broad church, so I will include it. But what are you going to give me for the fly culture road trip playlist on Spotify?
Well, what I don't want to do is I don't want people to switch off. That's simple, right? So let's not give that. My ideal world, it'd be something like Spring Yard by CJ Boland or Ballpark by Joey Beltram, which are utter techno bangers. However, I'll give you something that's absolutely, what's the word for it? Atmospheric, moody, emotional. There's a band called Death in Vegas, and they've got a song called Dirge, Dirge. It is absolutely phenomenal. And when you hear it, you'll be like, yep, fair play, Steve. But I like all music, from country to punk to, like I say, Lock Groove Techno is my favourite, and Acid House. But go with Death in Vegas, Dirge. Nice easy one for you, Pete.
Yeah, I will look that one up and see that it doesn't give me a headache. So before I
it won't.
That one on. So we'll have a look. I've got to do a shout out as well that I was very lucky to go and see The Cure and their new album.
Brilliant band.
Songs of a Lost World. But this album is just absolutely mind-blowing, and give that a listen too. So we'll do that. What about, how can people find you? Because you talk so much sense, you talk straight, you talk honestly, and with a depth of knowledge and experience as well. So I think people can get something from, if they haven't tracked you down already, how can they find you on social media?
Do you know what, Pete? I used to go to town with my posts. I would write long, rambling posts. However, I didn't post as much now, probably for the same reason as you. I didn't feel the need to. My last decent post is when I went fishing 2 weeks ago with some nice grayling pics and just a little rambling story. But yeah, Facebook, Steve Cullen. I think I'm the only one on there fishing wise. Instagram, Peeping Caddis or Steve Cullen. You'll find me on both. I've got a lot of people in there, and also on YouTube, again, Steve Cullen. But I've also got my own website, which is flyfishguide.co.uk. But again, I'm getting old. My family time takes up most of my time nowadays. I also write blogs for Guide Fly Fishing, which can be found under the Guide Fly Fishing website. which is a great site, by the way. If you get a chance, go and have a wee look at it. But yeah, lots of information stuff on there. But I think, similar to you, there's a lot of information on socials, but I can see behind you, and I've got them all down by me, and so I'm standing here. So everything below me is books. Read books, learn more about fly fishing, because there's a lot to learn. Didn't think you know it all. And the other thing, and I said it right at the start, why are so many of us scared of failure? Just get on and get it done.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful place to stop, and a beautiful thought for people to think about. Just enjoy it for exactly what it is. Don't worry about it. We all get stuck in trees. We all lose flies. We all lose fish. I don't care. It's still good fun, and I'll happily admit that I do it all the time. Mate, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm so pleased that we got the chance to speak, because I know you talk about these sorts of things. I'm sometimes perhaps a bit too diplomatic, and you have been incredibly so as well, but you're not afraid to talk about these things. And I think it's really important that we do. And I know listeners are going to enjoy hearing this podcast, because you're talking so much sense. The crayfish thing, I think, will get people thinking a little bit more as well, along with all those other things. But your love and passion for fly fishing burns as deep as it ever has done, and long may that continue. And I'd just like to say a massive thank you for being a guest today, mate. I've enjoyed talking with you immensely.
I really appreciated the time, Pete. And I maybe waffled on a little bit, but I think we've covered off all the points quite well there.
Absolutely. Well, everyone, this has been another episode of the Fly Culture Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this one as much as me. We try and make these things as different, vary the content, try not to go down those same routes, so that hopefully 200 and however many episodes later, you're still enjoying it and finding it interesting. And I'll work as hard as I ever can to make content interesting for you, and of course there'll never be any charge for them. So thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Fly Culture Podcast.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly published magazine owned and run by fly anglers. When it comes to fly fishing, we've got you covered.